Hello. I'd like to start by welcoming you to this, which is our third webinar. So welcome back to anyone who had seen our previous webinars. And if this is your first time, then welcome and thank you for joining us. So to reiterate, this is aimed at people who have difficulties with mood. And what I mean by that is, it might be that your mood is low, but it might also be that your mood fluctuates. Your mood might go up and down. And sometimes it might be due to something very small, or it could be that you don't even know why it's happening. This is also for people who have problems with their emotions. And what I mean by that is that they might experience lots of different emotions coming quite quickly, or they might have some quite overwhelming emotions. Or for some people, it might be that they're not sure about their emotions or that they don't actually feel that much. This is also for people who have difficulties with their interactions with other people, so relationships with those around them, which might be housemates, colleagues, family or friends, but difficulties in managing those relationships. And it really doesn't matter about diagnoses, whether you have a diagnosis or not. If those things you've heard sound like they apply to you, then this is for you. So I did want to say that we're doing this because we're aware that people who do have difficulties with mood and emotions and their interaction with others might be struggling at this time. And I know that some people might not have been accessing services, so this is for you, and that some people might have been accessing services in various forms at Oxleas, and that might have been individual or group therapy. And I know, for example, the Sun group and the Common Foundations group are no longer running, so this is also providing something for you. So this webinar is intended to provide information. What I mean by that is to provide a bit of clarity. There are changes to mental health services at the moment. There's changing government advice. So to provide a bit of clarity on what's happening and what you might be able to expect. But also to provide information on, or to help you think about what might be going on in terms of the thoughts you're having or what you're experiencing. So in addition to information, we also wanted to try to provide some support. And that would be in the form of helping you to think about some difficulties that you might be having, or letting you know the kind of difficulties other people are having, and maybe some of the solutions that they might have. Okay, so we're changing the format a little bit today, and Neil will go on to talk about that a bit more, but we will be having a guest speaker who's coming in to answer some of the questions that you might have. So if I introduce myself, my name is Kumar and I'm a Sun Group supervisor and I'm a medical psychotherapy consultant at Oxleas.
Yeah, so I'm Neil Springham. I'm an art therapist by background and I lead the psychological therapy services in Bromley. I work in a mentalisation service and other areas as well. I'm also lead for patient experience in Bromley, so I'm very interested in feedback, and we'll be talking a little bit more about feedback today from you.
Okay. So I did want to mention before we go any further that we do cover topics depending on what you ask us, and that those can range to topics around mood or anxiety, but we might cover other topics like self-harm or suicidal thoughts. So I know that for some people that might be difficult to hear about and it might be triggering. So what I would ask is that you use your judgment, and if you need to pause or stop, then please do so. So I wanted to talk about how this is going to work. So in essence, what we want is for you to direct this, for you to guide us. And what I mean by that is if you're watching this, you should have access to a link and an email. And you can email into us, and you can do that before or after, but you can do it live now, and we'll receive it as we're going. And the idea is that you can let us know essentially what you want us to focus on. And what I mean by that is I would ask that you would email in. You can email in questions, you can email in feedback. But in particular, we are also interested in what's causing you difficulty at the moment, what's hard for you, what's challenging. And then we can think about that together. But also something that's forgotten is what's working. Because I think it's easy to focus on the difficulties, which can become overwhelming, but what is actually going better than expected, or what is helping you? Because I think it would be helpful to share that. So just to reiterate all of that, I think there's a strong emphasis on you emailing in, and you can direct what we do. So I'd really encourage you to do that. And the idea is that we can think about the issues you raise and try to help you build on the skills you already have. So I'd like to thank those who emailed in before. If you've emailed in before, please feel free to email in again. I'll be monitoring the emails, and I will bring up any topics or recurring themes that come up. So over to you, Neil.
So you notice that there's two of us this week. Joanna normally joins us, and Joanna just happens to have some physical illness this week. Not COVID. So Joanna will be joining us next week, and certainly we're not changing the sort of personnel, because having somebody with lived experience and who's now providing services, we think is essential to make this work. So we're really missing Joanna this week, and we wish her well, but I'm sure we'll see her next week. Through the magic of technology, we're hoping that a colleague will appear, because one of the questions we had was around this thing called dissociation or derealization, depersonalization. We wanted to go into a little bit of depth into what that is. So we'll be joined by a colleague soon, Kate, who has, by the magic, appeared. Hi, Kate.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Fantastic.
So that's fantastic timing. Even looks like it was planned, which is amazing. So one of the things we were just saying was that without Joanna being here, which is a shame, but actually it's really nice to have a guest. We have a particular question that we wanted to put to you, Kate. But first, I wondered if you could introduce yourself, because I've worked with you for a long time. And I'm really impressed with the work and the studying that you've been doing around trauma and around related kind of experiences that go with that. So I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. So I'm Kate. I'm one of the lead clinical psychologists in the team, and I've been working with various different manifestations of trauma for quite some years now. And I suppose it's increasingly become obvious to me that so many of the presentations that we see, people that come to the team have experienced so many different types of trauma in some form or another. It just makes sense to me to look at things from that perspective. And the more that I saw that, the more I wanted to train in various different methods that would help people to understand their experiences. Yeah. Like
Can you say something about some of the trainings and some of the areas that you've been studying? Because I think sometimes people may think there's only one form of treatment for trauma, or there's only one type of trauma. I wondered if you could comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because trauma can affect people in such different ways, there are so many different approaches that can be really helpful. So there are the more traditional ways of working, particularly on the traumatic events themselves, which might be things like EMDR, which I'm trained in, and CBT is another way that people can use for working on specific events. But then schema therapy is another great way of understanding how traumatic experiences have affected relationships and how people come to see themselves and how they have learnt to cope with emotion or not learnt to cope with emotion, depending on the experiences that they've had.
So with those type of approaches, my understanding is some of it you need someone else to help you with.
Yeah.
But actually there is a whole area of self-help, which sometimes people maybe underestimate. And I wondered if you had, before we go into the specific question, I wondered if you had any thoughts about what people can do for themselves, as opposed to always feeling they need somebody else there.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, because in order to be able to go into any of those perhaps more targeted approaches, there's a preliminary or a really important foundation stage that needs to happen first, which is around learning how to manage symptoms. So symptoms, whether that's dissociative symptoms or flashback type things, but it's also just generally about how to cope with the emotions that somebody might feel that feels overwhelming, and that really can be done independently without needing someone else there alongside to do that. And it's great that it's become more and more accessible. I think there are so many great resources out there.
That's fantastic. And I think when we're talking about these symptoms, we're talking about things all the way from depression and anxiety through to some of the more classical things that we think of as trauma.
Yes, because, you know, there's no one way of thinking about trauma. Trauma is individual to each person, and not having the care and attention that you needed growing up kind of time and time again can have such an impact, as much as perhaps being bullied or feeling humiliated in a certain situation. All of these things can be conceptualized as traumatic, and for some people they will be, for some people they might not be.
I think that's a great point, isn't it? Because I've noticed in treatment settings, people often worry that they can't point to any one particular bad thing that happens. And yet what you're saying is sometimes it's also to do with the things we didn't get, which can be traumatic as well.
Absolutely. I think that can have an enormous impact, and it's so hard to pinpoint because if you didn't get it, you don't know what you needed.
Exactly. Great. I wondered, Kumar, if now would be a good time, because the question I thought was very well put together and maybe something that other people listening may resonate with.
Okay, so I'll read out the question now. How do I stop dissociating from my emotions? I find that I don't realise what I'm feeling until sometimes days later, and then they explode. Or I don't have any emotions, and instead I get body pain or migraines or fainting. A lot of advice says keep busy to cope with bad emotions, but that just seems to make me worse.
Wow, what a great question. And there's so many points within that, aren't there, that are so relevant to so many people. So could you tell me the first bit, because I want to try and address it in order if I can.
Okay, so the first bit was, how do I stop dissociating from my emotions? I find that I don't realise what I'm feeling until sometimes days later, and then they explode. Okay,
so in terms of how do I stop dissociating from my feelings, it's really, I think, useful to understand dissociation as an attempt to cope with difficult feelings. So it's a kind of survival strategy in a way that often starts much earlier in life, but then is just used it becomes automatic. So it started off to really help with something, and now perhaps it's causing problems in its own right. So in order to learn how to stop dissociating, it's really important to learn how to tolerate one's own feelings and experiences, and to learn how to connect with oneself, which can be really, really hard and scary, particularly if it's been something that someone hasn't been doing for a long time. So there are some just general principles that can be quite useful, such as grounding. So trying to get into the moment as much as possible, because usually what feels overwhelming and scary isn't happening in this moment right now. It's either being reminded about something that's happened in the past, or it might be worrying about something that might or might not happen in the future. So trying to get yourself into the room that you're in, or whatever space that you're in, and notice the cues around you that tell you that you're actually safe and okay in that moment is really helpful. And another principle is about mindfulness. So about being present in the moment as well, and learning how to pay attention to what's happening inside you as well. So just starting to tune in a really small way at first about what's happening in your body, what's happening in your mind, and how can you start to notice your emotions in a really small way, in a way that feels manageable. And then there are some, did you want to jump in?
I just think those are already really, really interesting points. So to me, and I'd be interested in Kumar's thoughts as well. So what you're saying is that actually when people are feeling really scared, they had learnt how to take themselves out of the room to disappear.
Yeah.
But actually, the here and now is one of the safest spaces you can be, if you are safe here and now.
Absolutely.
Coming back into the present moment is actually a safe space, but maybe people need to learn to practice coming back to the safe space, into the here and now, at times other than they are feeling distress or dissociated.
Absolutely, that's a good point. So it's going to be so much harder to do that at those times when things are feeling overwhelming and intense. So the more you can practice it at a time that you're feeling a little bit more settled, the easier you're going to find that route. So it's a really good habit to get into. So in a way, it's also being preventative a little bit. So just setting that time aside, if you can, to just learn how to check in with yourself a bit more.
Do you have any thoughts about how people can check in? So I think, we all think we can be very present in a room or in the here and now, but are there particular things that people could practice in preparation, before to just feel more in the here and now in that safe way? Have you experimented with any of those things?
Yeah, I'll caveat it with different things work for different people, obviously. So it's a bit of a kind of a toolbox approach about seeing what works for you personally. But just simply asking yourself, how am I feeling in my body right now is just a simple way of starting to do that. Because how our bodies feel give us some information about our emotional state.
I think that's really great. There were some other parts of the questions about maybe if I try and do something else and distract myself. And I wondered, I like you were saying, it'd be nice to be reminded of that part of the question because it was very well put, I thought, Kumar.
So that part of the question was, a lot of advice says, keep busy to cope with bad emotions, but that seems to just make me worse.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question because there's a balance, I think, about if you don't do anything, then you can really run the risk of being completely taken over by emotion or the dissociative experience or the kind of disconnection that you might be having in response to the dissociation, and that can feel so unpleasant in itself. So there's something about having some structure and activity that can be useful in helping to ground and to help things feel less scary. But then if you go up the other end of that spectrum and keep busy all the time and don't allow yourself any time to connect with what's going on for you, it's a little bit like pushing a beach ball under the water, and it eventually will pop up somewhere else with great kind of, great energy, and it might be unpredictable and it's going to be more overwhelming than just letting the beach ball sit on the water and just kind of go up and down with the waves of the emotion itself, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I can feel it, as you say. Was there a last bit to that question, Kumar?
Can I say one more bit actually before we go on? It's just made me think, so DBT is also another way of helping people to prepare for working on more upsetting aspects of their experience. So this is all about tools as well. And one part of DBT is about distress tolerance. So it's about getting through a difficult moment. So there can be it can be useful to distract yourself sometimes, but just for a short period, really. If you need to get through something difficult, that will be better once you get to that certain endpoint. So, for example, if you're waiting for a call and you're feeling really stressed about that, maybe distracting yourself to get through that moment of time until the call happens and then you feel better. So keeping busy can be useful, but not if you're doing it all the time, because then you never get that chance to check in and deal with the emotions that are being stirred up.
Because you mentioned something called the window of tolerance.
I did.
And I wondered, is that something that you can have a small window? I wondered if you could expand it through learning to tolerate more. I mean, yeah, did you have some slides? I mean,
I did.
Be brave and see if we can get those up.
I have, but I actually don't know how. Oh, maybe I can do it. Oh, great. Is it the graph? Wonderful, thank you. So let me get that up myself so I can explain it. So I hope other people will find this useful too, because I find it a really useful principle in terms of helping people understand where they might be at in terms of how connected they might be with themselves. So people probably have heard of the fight or flight response to traumatic experiences. So that kind of preparing for action, everything is on, you're ready to go, everything's very lively in the body and everything's going very fast. So actually, particularly when someone's had a lot of traumatic things happen in their lives, or they haven't learned how to kind of cope with emotions to soothe that, it can be the case that you can get stuck in that state. And then because that can feel so overwhelming and unmanageable, that's where this idea of kind of disconnecting can come in. And then that can take you outside of that window, down the bottom, where I don't know if it's possible to go on to the next slide at all as well, in terms of the dropping off, numbing, disconnecting, feeling tired, which people often report when they feel dissociated or disconnected. So you can be going between these different points, and it's all an attempt to try and make emotions feel more manageable. So the goal is to stay within what we call the window of tolerance, is when we can be in touch with our emotions, but we can also be connected with our minds as well. So we can think clearly, and then that's the best place to be, because you can then figure out what to do about your emotions and what action to take. So when you're going out to the top of the window, when your thinking goes, when all you can feel is your emotions, and you're in that fight or flight, then that's when the kind of grounding and the soothing techniques can help you get back into that window, and then you can start to think again, and then you can start to make a choice about what do I need to do here to deal with the situation that's caused the emotions, and what's going to help me best at this moment. And then if you're going out the bottom of the window, then you can start to think, well, how can I connect back again? How can I tune in? How can I start to feel a bit more? And that information will then also tell me, what do I need to do here? Because if you're out the top or out the bottom, you can't think clearly enough to be able to do the things that are probably going to help. And also, if the graph shows as well how the pattern tends to be going out the top and then dropping out the bottom, because the top felt so unmanageable, but then it doesn't feel nice not to feel it either. So then often then going out the top again, and that's just exhausting and contributes to that idea of emotions feeling so unstable and unpleasant. And the grey line on the graph that's a little bit more wavy is the ideal situation where we kind of want to get to, where emotions naturally go up and down, but they always feel within that tolerable window. I hope that was clear. I don't know if you've got any questions about that, or if any further explanation is needed.
We'd be very happy to take questions and perhaps even have you back to kind of explain. But what I like about the window of tolerance is it helps you understand when you come to a point when you really can't cope and you need to just take a break from it, and not try and push yourself to do the impossible or hold yourself up against some impossible standard, because we're up against a very old system here, aren't we? I mean, this is, evolution, isn't it? But good luck if you're trying to go up against that, I think,
And I also think as well, the system is really designed for survival. It's intended to help us. But unfortunately, the problems come when the system kind of gets stuck on or off. So we're just trying to help work with nature in a way, work with the way our minds naturally work, and to try and turn the protection off when it's not needed.
There was another part of the question. It was, or this is following on from the previous bit, or I don't have any emotions and instead I get body pain, migraines and fainting.
Yeah. So that could really be, again, about the emotion not being tolerated and being pushed into the body, which I think we see quite a lot. So again, the more you can tune into the emotions and bring it into your awareness with time, the idea would be that you might not experience it so much in the body in that really painful, unpleasant way. I don't know if either of you have other ideas about that, but that would be how I would see it.
I think it's useful that the person who wrote this question had made that link between the emotions and experiencing things in the body, and I think that's really helpful, because then it's not something else scary that you have to think about. You can see the link between them.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not like here's yet another thing that's happening. It's all part of the same thing, isn't it? And I really hope that people watching this who have these experiences, generally we find that if you understand what's happening, you can think, I've got a body pain. I'm feeling unreal. I'm feeling anxious and I don't know why. Try and come back to what we've been talking about here, because you can understand it. There are ways of working on it. And I think going back to this thing of the window of tolerance, maybe you've stepped out of your window of tolerance and it's time to be good to yourself. But also I think, Kate, what you really helped us think about is there are things you can do before you get there, and that actually having small practices which help you come back into the safe here and now are things that are best practiced if you do them regularly. And I think perhaps we haven't said enough about this in services in the past, that things work best if you can keep practicing things and build up the muscle so you can get back quickly. So I really want to thank you, Kate. I know that we asked you to come on at short notice in these funny times, and look, we even learned to use slides whilst being live.
I can't say I learned to do that, but thank you very much for the help. I hope that was visible, and I hope that's kind of illustrated a bit what we've been talking about.
And it's really good to have someone who's been sort of delving so deeply into all of this, and it'd be really nice to invite you again. But we know you're in the middle of a busy day, and we'd like to try and take some other questions. So we're really happy if you want to drop out now, and thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Okay, so I was going to continue with some more questions now, but looking at the emails, we've had an email in about things that are actually useful and things which are going well. So I thought that I would read that out for the benefit of everyone, really, and we could think about it. So there were 2 points. That one of them was, I have turned off all my notifications on my phone, which saves me being bombarded with news. I also only watch one piece of news a day. That was the first part. And the second part was, I have taken up Lego, which I find absorbs my thoughts and allows me to create something. I've done one project and now on another one.
Oh, I really like this. One thing that we were talking about with Joanna and our project team was, we think a lot of people who use our services, what works. And what would be really nice is if you could keep sending them in. One piece of news that we have is that we are getting a web page now. And I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but we're going to have a web page. that's going to have the email address that will be the one-stop shop for all of this, because we know it's been difficult sort of having different links here, there and everywhere. But we want to be able to put a resource pack on there. And what would be better than having resources from you guys who are making this thing work at home? I really like the Lego. I like the idea of turning off the notifications. This has a real world feel to it. We think if you could keep sending us these suggestions, we could use them on the webpage, but we could also use them within services. I know people who are working within the crisis line would really like to have some grounded experience that they could pass on to people who ring up and ask, what can I do? I'm feeling like this. Being able to direct them to this webpage or being able to tell them, if you feel you've got any of these kind of resources or tips or what you're doing that's worked, please send them in, because then you can start to help other people. And I think that's something that we really, really need in this particular time.
So I would agree with that. And I think it's very helpful for other people to hear, people who might be struggling, what's working for other people. And I was also interested in the particular comment. So the one about turning off the notifications because of being bombarded with news and watching one piece of news a day. I mean, I'm impressed that you're able to do that. It's hard because we are bombarded with so much, but especially the watching one piece of news a day, because I think watching the news at times can be quite scary, because there's a lot of scary things that we're being told about. So being able to limit it so that you get information, but you don't get overwhelmed and then worry about it, I think is a really helpful way of managing the threat almost that can come in. Because not all news is like that, but a lot of news will focus on difficult things that are happening and might not focus on other areas like how many people are getting better and what the improvements might be. So I think it can be quite scary, and managing it in that way, I think, is useful.
I agree. Perhaps it shouldn't be called news, it should be called bad news, because they only seem to show bad news. And there's plenty written about this hysterical, screeching, eye-catching, bad news sells papers. I think we have to be skeptical. It's one of those things that I've done as well. And I think it's one of those practices I think I'm going to keep going after the lockdown as well. Please keep them coming, they're great. Kumar, did we have another question around depression?
We did. I'm just pulling it up now. It wasn't specifically around depression, but it was about struggling at this time.
Yes.
So I'll read the question out. I am using all of my normal distractions and coping mechanisms, but feel too overwhelmed. It feels like others are experiencing lockdown as a light rain shower, and I'm trapped in a hurricane. What can I do to try to keep myself safe when I feel completely abandoned by services?
It's very powerful, isn't it? It's very powerful. I mean, the imagery of somehow everyone else is having a light shower, but I'm having a hurricane. It's a tricky one, really, isn't it? Because how do we know what other people are experiencing? I mean, I think if we were looking at this in one of our groups, we would be trying to understand what happens when you compare yourself to other people, or even more accurately, when you compare yourself to what you imagine other people are doing. Because actually, being locked down, we don't know. My experience is, I think people are not coping as well as we always imagine. People are struggling, and that actually it would be good if we could find a way of kind of normalizing that, because these are really strange times. We've all had to adjust. All sorts of things are happening. And one of the things that's really, really important about coping that we know is that people cope better if they feel they're not the only one, if they feel they're not alone, and that somehow what's happening is normal. It's not just that I'm some freak or weirdo that somehow is being weak. these are things that we would really urge people to row back from and just question whether you really are so different from other people. Or is it that, for instance, would other people know that you are suffering, or would they think you're having the light rain shower? So it's a really, really tricky one. I know there's another bit about services, but Kumar, I wondered if you had some thoughts as well.
I did. I mean, this idea of being trapped in a hurricane, I'm sure that you're not alone with that. I mean, I know you're not alone with that kind of feeling. But I mean, I was thinking about what you'd said, Neil, about it's hard to know how other people are experiencing it. And sometimes people might appear that there might be the appearance that some people aren't struggling. I think people show it in different ways and maybe struggling with different aspects of it. So I do think it's hard to judge. But having said that, I do see the merit in acknowledging that for you it is a hurricane and that it is really difficult. Acknowledging those feelings, I think, isn't easy to do. And it also made me think about the hurricane that you're experiencing. How are you coping with it? Because I was wondering that what might be helpful. I imagine there's some things that do make it a bit better and some things that make it a bit worse. But what I'm getting at is that somehow you're finding a way to cope through the hurricane. And although it's horrible because it sounds very distressing, you are finding a way to cope. And I appreciate that the idea is to find a nicer way so that it's not a hurricane. But sometimes just acknowledging that you are finding a way to get through it can be helpful. And in terms of what other people are thinking or how other people are experiencing it, it's easy to say and sometimes harder to do, but being able to ask people and ask those around you, which again isn't an easy thing to do. Sometimes it might surprise you. And also being able to explain how you're feeling, that it is a hurricane for you, I think might be helpful for those who are around you to know, if you're not able to let them know.
I think that's really helpful. I think I want to commend you as well for writing in as one of the ways of coping. I hear what you're saying, that I'm sure you're not alone also in feeling that services have withdrawn. I can tell you from our side, we're really unhappy with having to be in this place where we can't run services as normal.
Yes.
We're in that phase where we're now wanting to end lockdown, but we have to keep social distancing going. We're also finding that a number of our service users are very worried about coming back into clinical sites. Again, going back to the news and how that is. And that's our primary motivation for doing this webinar, is that we have to find new ways of reaching out. I completely get your experience. I'm sure you're not alone of feeling that services have just vanished. We're still here. We need to find ways of reaching out. We need to keep getting better at that. I'll be honest, we'll get better at it if you can also help us by telling us what works. But well done for emailing in, and we certainly would recommend other people to email in and let us know those kind of experiences. Really important.
I wanted to add something to the end of that. The feeling of being abandoned by services. I mean, what I was thinking was, if you have had a bad experience with the service, and it sounds like that's what's happened, that the next time you contacted the service, you might have a different experience. I mean, we never know what the experience would be like, but it might be different. And I think sometimes when we ask for help and we don't get what we were hoping for, it's the thought can come in that, okay, asking for help didn't get me anywhere, I'm not going to do it again. But what I was thinking of is that there are multiple different services out there, and even from the same service, trying again might give you a different result.
I think that's really helpful. You know, one of the things that I think has been a side benefit of all this difficulty is, I think in a way we can reset some of the ways that we make contact with people and how. I know it would really help us, particularly as somebody who's involved in leading some of the services. If you have ideas about what you need to help you feel confident about ending lockdown, we would really, really like that. So when we do start to, I can see that individual sessions is one thing, meeting for assessments, groups are another. But, you know, this could be really helpful if you have ideas about what would make it safe to come back, or whether you would want to continue with a different form of remote working. We're going to have to learn together. And do you know what? That might make help seeking from us a bit more of an equal experience. It would be nice if that was the case. So please, and again, thanks for emailing other people. If you have suggestions or queries about this, this could be our opportunity to start working together in a slightly more equal way, I think. Was there anything else just before we start to wrap up the session?
Do you think we have time for another question?
I think we could certainly mention it and try and touch on it, and we have other weeks where we want to pick up on these issues.
Okay, well, another question that we've had is, during these times, I'm eating a lot more than I usually would, and I'm not sure how to stop.
I think this is really, I mean, there are all sorts of things out there, aren't there, about people putting on weight and how hard it is to structure a day. And I can remember years ago, there was an idea of having a work structured day, even if you don't have work, because we just respond better to having structure in our day, because it gives us, we don't just have to experience emptiness and horrible sort of feelings that can come with that. But it's really hard, isn't it, to structure your day when you're having to do that for yourself. You're not meeting other people and being structured around any of those things. But I think it's one of those things that I think we have to keep working at. And I would be really interested to hear from anyone else about how you have managed to control eating or going to the fridge or any of these things that we've all been tempted to do, with some of the spare space that we seem to have inherited. Perhaps sometimes eating can be a bit to do with anxiety, and we could go back to some of the things Kate was telling us about. That maybe it's a way of trying to quell feelings and stuff them down, and there might be another way of addressing that. I mean, those are my initial thoughts. Would be great if when Joanna comes back, she can talk from her experience. But Kumar, do you have any thoughts about that?
I did, but they're similar to the points you were raising. What I was thinking about is noticing when it is that you're eating more, and seeing if it is, for example, that you are eating more at nighttime, or you are eating more in response to feelings. And I think noticing that is an important first step. And then it occurred to me that, I mean, it's easy to say, but having an alternative to eating, because if you're eating in response to, say, for example, feeling anxious or feeling low, is there something else that you could do that might make you feel better in that time as opposed to eating? But I also agree, having structure would be useful, because if you are feeling like snacking or eating something, but you know that your meal time is coming, I think that naturally is helpful.
It's interesting because when we were starting these webinars, we talked about some of the research about people in these lockdown situations. And one of the ones was people, scientists in the Arctic. And actually they struggled with overeating as well, because, you know, it's endless winter, they can't go out. It was structure, doing creative things, having a project, and in a way creating a kind of work like situation, but one that you enjoy, gave you some contrast in the day. It seemed to be one of the things that helped those guys. I think we're all working in the Arctic Circle at the moment. So, you know, but again, if people have ideas, please let us know. So we've sort of come to time now. Look, one thing I would say is this is the fourth week of doing this. We had some huge technical problems and we apologize about that. We also had a bank holiday. We plan for this to be regular at this time. We will have a web page and we'll have much more reliable ways of communicating. I'm really impressed with Oxleas Trust that they have completely supported us through IT, communications, inventing all of these new structures for doing this. We will get better, and we hope to now be much more reliable. And in that sense, could you please, try and be a regular watcher, because this is going to be going on for the foreseeable future. If you have friends and colleagues that you think you would like to bring into this, please do, and use the email so that we can make this interactive. Anything else from you, Kumar? I mean, I wonder if we...
There wasn't anything else from me. It would just be echoing what you said. I'd really encourage people to email in, because this is for you, so you can guide us and help us to make it something that is helpful for you.
Yeah, so it's a bit rocky. I like to think, because I was there, folks, I like to think it's the early days of punk rock, where it was complete rubbish at the beginning, but it turned into something that was a thing of beauty. Probably deluding myself about that, but that's the look we're going for. So look, it's a rough start, but we're getting there, and actually we'll get there a lot better with you involved. Next week, we'll have a slightly different array of faces. Joanna will be back. But from now on, we hope to be very regular, and we'll be texting out to some groups and through ADAPT teams and HTT teams, the page for the web page, the link for the web page, when we get that. And we hope that will be in the next week or so. And then we've got a much more reliable way of communicating. But thank you very much for watching today.
Thank you.
Okay, over and out.